All right, well, thank you so much all for being here for this alchemy class today. And for those who are new, we've covered a few principles, but I always like to build on what was done before. But at the same time, I want to make sure that anyone who's new, who hasn't seen the other ones, that no one's going to get lost. So it's sort of like, a lot of times TV shows will say previously on, and they'll show all the relevant pieces to kind of bridge that gap between people who are following a continuous story versus people who are brand new. So whenever there's a concept that's come up before, I'll just briefly introduce it and talk just a little bit about it as well. Some of the other things I've found since the time I talked about it first. Okay, so this one might seem like a little bit of a strange title, but it all ties together. So it's cyclosystems and part of alchemists. Three different areas we're going to be talking about. We spent a little bit of time talking about mercury, sulfur, and salt, and that will come up here. And but we talked a little bit about the whole thing about the Coagula and the Ouroborous, and that's kind of the heart of what we're going to be talking about today, is about what the different meanings of the Ouroborous are. And as I mentioned before, it's kind of one of my peeves when someone says, oh, this means this, and oh, the Ouroborous just means cycles, or it just means solvated coagula, or whatever it is. Whenever you say, this symbol means this one thing, it's not terrible, but you really lose the ability to learn from all the different layers of what's there. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Ouroborous with the whole idea of cycles and loops today, and get a little bit deeper into it. But at the same time, I'm not this, I don't want anyone saying, oh, well, there's like 5 different meanings of it here, but just know that that's a small fraction of the totality of what these symbols mean. And everything that I say as a statement is, I would just ask if you could be sort of the inspiration of your own questions where you start to explore it for yourself. Okay, so we're going to start with batteries. We talked a little bit about positive and negative. For everyone who's here in a Rosicrucian order, we all know about the positive and negative breathing. And it's a really great breathing practice, working with the positive polarity and the negative polarity of doing breath retentions with your lungs full of air and then breath retentions with them empty of air, or like a minimum amount of air. And you do different things, I won't get into it, but there's a certain physiology that you do to help accent the energy and emphasize the energy of either the positive or the negative. And for everyone who's gone through that exercise and uses that tool, you know that it's a really powerful thing to help balance. And a lot of times what, Zulia a lot of times will be the energy rebalancing, and we'll do positive and negative breathing, and we'll do the process with the water. But it's really important too, there's so many beneficial things you can get from just understanding basic polarity of positive and negative. So with the battery, what it is there's the positive pole of the battery and the negative pole. And this one is like, positive pole is the copper, the black is the negative pole, and the current goes out and goes through. All electrical plugs, it's 2 prongs. If you have a third prong, then that's the ground. And it's kind of interesting too, because I'm thinking about this now, I never really thought about this before. It's sort of if you have a 3-prong outlet, it's sort of like in the order we have what's called the law of the triangle. That there's like, there's like a positive pole, a negative pole, and a neutral pole. Or like the sacred masculine, sacred feminine, and then sacred child. That sort of trinity, and we'll get into triangles as well too, but that sort of completes it as a trinity, where here it's just binary. Or you have just like something like a lamp, not like a heavy industrial strength thing that has a 3-prong. If you have just a lamp or something, a lot of times it's just 2-prong. But you can see that there's a flow from the north pole to the south pole of the magnet, or from the positive pole of the battery to the negative pole. And also in terms of questions and statements, there's a polarity with language. And as I mentioned this before in other talks, when you make a statement of like, this is so amazing, that's a strong positive polarity. Like, where's the energy going? The energy's going out. You're in this state and you're like, this is fantastic, and it's this expansive sending out type of energy. That's a statement, that's an explanation. That's a positive polarity. When you ask yourself, what's the best way to do this, or how can I get through this situation, or whatever it is, that's a negative polarity. That's a question. That creates a vacuum to sort of pull things in. so the next little piece I'm going to get into this, is there's this area that I've been sort of experimenting with for the last couple months, and it's the more I get into it, the more I see that it's something really beneficial to share, and also too the thread that I've followed is from that statement solve a coagula, and just to clarify what that means, solve a coagula means to dissolve and coagulate. So for as we covered in the second talk I gave on the Emerald Tablet about the 7 phases of alchemy, this phase 2 is dissolution, it's dissolving. And then there's basically, it's like coagulation is the last phase. So it's basically the shortcut of saying this whole long form is saying solve a coagula. And that's been said that the whole of alchemy, if you're going to compress it into a small little statement, could be solve a coagula. So what that means, or I'll say what that can mean, because I'm trying not to have dogma to say, okay, this is the one answer for this. How I see it is it's about dissolving what doesn't serve you and gathering up the raw materials to create what can serve you and further you in your life. And we have our life experience, and then that becomes the past, that becomes what we remember, that's part of our personal history. But it's important to dissolve any limiting aspects of that, to allow yourself to free up the energy to then coagulate or gather the elements to create something new. Otherwise, you're just living in the past. So that's just a little bit about solve a coagula. It's about dissolving and gathering. And if you continue it, it can be an ongoing refining process where you're dissolving and then you're taking the best and gathering it. And then what doesn't work about that, you're dissolving and then you're gathering it again. So I just want to cover just that last little bit of detail about how the association of those phases. So how I've been working with this in the last couple of months, I've been having some experiments that I've been doing. And that's another thing I really appreciate about the Rosicrucian order is the idea of, not being dogmatic to say, the ideal of the Rosicrucian is being a walking question mark, rather than a walking exclamation point, which we have many of raging around in the world right now. But being a walking question mark, you're always curious. You're saying, maybe, this is interesting. Let me try this. Let me work with this. Let me see what happens with this. And all in the monographs, the lessons, they don't say, this is your exercise. They say, here's an experiment. So what's interesting is an exercise is basically saying, this is the thing you need to do. And it's all about the objective form. The experiment, by calling it an experiment, includes your own subjective experience. Does it work for you? What is the impact? What happens for you? So when you say it's an experiment, that leaves it open-ended. It's a question mark. It's by the form. It has a negative polarity. It's a both. It's a statement, but also it's a question. Like, what's your result? Every time there's an experiment, it's what's going to be the result of the experiment. There's an opening. There's a question mark. So I had most people are familiar with the whole idea of building up muscle, and or you've heard of the anabolic steroids or something like that. So the process of building up in the body is called anabolism. The process of breaking down in the body is catabolism. And the thing that's really interesting is I've been doing intermittent fasting for a while, and I've had some really good experience with it, some good benefits from it. And it's funny because I found this one approach that's basically like 20 hours of fasting and 4 hours of feeding. And I first thought, oh, that's ridiculous. How is that going to work? Your blood sugar is going to be all crazy. But then I read a little bit more about it, and he was saying people undervalue the catabolic phase, and they overvalue the anabolic phase. So all day long, people are shoving in protein and superfoods and this and that and all these antioxidants and all this stuff, and there's a sort of a cultural bias towards anabolism, of building up. And there's not enough of an even-handed balance of letting go. And there's many, many significant benefits when you balance that. And when I started doing it, I noticed that my health in all different ways, mental clarity, endurance, energy level, like strength, everything went up. And that seems counterintuitive when you are just like eating like 4 hours a day of like concentrated eating I have like an 8-hour time window most days. It's not like rigid, but about 8 hours where I'm having stuff that's not distilled water, where I'll have herbal tea or I'll have coffee or whatever, and I'll have like one kind of concentrated meal. Because in just the distilled water, that's the catabolic phase, that's solvating. That is about dissolving. And when you do that, your body there's apoptosis, which is the programmed cell death. It's like your cells are told, sick or diseased cells are triggered in the process to say, you know, you need to go, and then they're recycled by the body. And when you create enough of a negative charge, which is the charge of catabolism, it's breaking down. What happens is all of those raw materials, the fats, the proteins, all these extra extraneous materials that are in the body become used. They become the fuel that you run on because you're just drinking water. And there's a number of different people that have found this as well. There's a guy named Dr. Sachin Panda. He's with the Salk Institute, and he found that working with mice, that they were just having them eat whenever they're, you know, have their food dish and water and stuff like that, and they just do whatever they felt like. And then they decided, well, let's just experiment. And they had 12 hours a day, they could eat whatever they wanted, and then 12 hours a day, it was just nothing but water. And their body mass proportions shifted for the positive, regardless of what they were eating. So even the test ones, they were given like really poor diets, actually had better body composition than the ones that were eating even higher quality food 24 hours a day. Then they found that if they had a 9-hour time window, their endurance went way up. The body composition was about the same, but their endurance went way up. And he was saying that that's based on circadian rhythm. So there's anabolism, catabolism, and circadian rhythm. So there's all these things, and I'm just showing that this is one of the examples that I started doing my own research, following the principle of solve coagula, and looking and saying, okay, well, I'm just, you know, this coming from this unbalanced perspective of build up the body, you need all these antioxidants, you need all these things, and always building the body with never letting it, you know, purge. So, for anyone who's ever had a major, you know, spring cleaning, and you let go of your stuff, or you say, I'm going to half my possessions, it feels really amazing. When you start to let go, you say, okay, I can, you know, sell, donate, and throw away, whatever it is, and you reduce your stuff. Your space feels a lot better. That's catabolism. You were breaking down. You were breaking down what's there. And when you get new things, then that's anabolism. That's coagula. That's building. So it's important to look, because a lot of times we tend to have a bias. We might think, well, you know, if we have sort of unconscious, unprocessed beliefs or things like that in our awareness, we might feel, oh, there's never enough, and we might hoard. And hoarding is excessive coagula. It's excessive building. It's excessive gathering. People that might have like a real sort of deep poverty consciousness, it might manifest as they can't own anything, or it might manifest as hoarding lots of small little things. So it's just useful to look at the process of anabolism and catabolism, and look to say, it's like the inhale and exhale. If you always inhale more than you exhale, you're gonna have problems. It's this balanced flow. And when you let things break down, it naturally creates that negative polarity that can kind of pull things in too. Another last little piece I'll share about this is that there's something called, it's like chlorine dioxide, or it's also called MMS, and it's a cleansing thing. And what it is most people are familiar with antioxidants. What this is actually, it's a pro-oxidant. It helps the body accelerate the oxidation process to break down old tissues, pathogens, stuff like that. Two really quick resources I'll give is just, there's a guy named Jim Humble, who's really great, who I've learned a lot from, and there's a woman named Carrie Riviera, who works with autistic children. And they, if you just look up, research them, they're the two best sources I know, but they've been able to do miraculous things by these little drops you put in water, and then you drink. It's based on oxidation, where it can oxidize pathogens, heavy metals, any kind of toxins in the body. It helps oxidize, make it water soluble to break down and pass out of the body. So even mercury and things like that can become water soluble and pass out. So they're really, really good people. I would look up their resources and just look to see. And so part of what I do now is following that solve coagula is when I'm in the catabolic phase each day of like just having distilled water, I'll take some MMS to help further that action of letting go of stuff. And then after that phase is finished, then I'm having antioxidants, which is building the system up. And I've noticed so many positive improvements in, like I said, in all areas where there's it's like focusing on cleansing and like clearing stuff out, and then focusing on building. And when you have a really distinct, very clear phase of cleansing, then when you do eat, it's like this vibrant, amazing thing, and the body starts humming, and it's awesome. But if you are constantly eating all day long, or constantly gathering things, or getting little trinkets, your space, it's a little unbalanced in terms of the anabolism. So yeah, I'd recommend Jim Humble, Terry Riviera, and Dr. Sachin and the Salk Institute for time. It's called time-restricted eating, is what he does. Okay, so just a little bit about it. So as we talked about with the mercury, sulfur, and salt, it's really important to use that principle to attain balance. So if someone has excessive of the mercury principle, or too much of the salt, too much of the sulfur, that can lead to imbalances. But if you can take a step back and using that template, you can see, oh, these are the psychological qualities associated with mercury, or this is sulfur, this is salt. And you can start to see your own patterns in a different light and use that template to see how you can find more balance. So in terms of Solvay, if you are sort of detached, Lori, if you excess Solvay, like people that never want to take on commitments, like, oh, I'm not going to commit to that, I can't do that, or I can't own anything, or whatever, or I'm detached, that are vacant, that's a little bit excess of the emptiness, excess vacuum, excess Solvay. Excess Coagula is people that are all about gathering. They want to gather and build. And they can't let anything go. They hold on to stuff. Maybe they hold on to old arguments, old grudges, things like that. It's a holding on, it's a gathering. And one of the most obvious examples is people that do hoarding. They have lots of some part of them feels impoverished. Maybe psychologically they feel that they don't have anything, or they don't have anything worthwhile. They would want to fill that gap by having lots of little trinkets, lots of little things. So it's important to look at that to see, okay, do I have a good balance? And when you free up the energy of all these little trinkets or whatever, and you donate them to a charity who can use them and they can turn into something good for somebody else, that can be a really positive thing. So any kind of congesting, hoarding, crowding, that kind of compacted sort of feeling is a little bit excess of the coagula. And this phase, when you really get into the feeling of the Solvay and coagula, they potentiate each other. So if you have a really good day, like walking in fresh air and exercise, and have this activity, and then you sleep really soundly that night, that's positive and negative. They potentiate each other, they further each other. And when you start working with this in different areas of your life, like I just shared a little bit about diet, about just nutrition in general, and timing of things, that when I started feeling a strong negative and then a strong positive, and then there's this energy where they really potentiate each other, and one sets the phase to the other. Where if you're in a fasted state, you have more insulin sensitivity, so your body can more intelligently handle sugar. So there's all of these things that they potentiate each other. It's really useful to look at what areas of your life do you maybe overly collect or overly gather. What areas of your life you push things away and you're like, okay, I'm not going to have any commitments. I need to have simplicity, all the stuff. I'm not going to agree to all this other stuff. I need to be totally free at all times. That's the other excess. So it's just useful to look at those two things. So with these, the paper, hopefully everyone has paper and something to take notes with. So I would just ask that you write down these 3 questions, and rather than trying to come up with an answer right now, if you just ask these questions and just take a moment and sit with them, and then allow the questions to happen. As I mentioned in an earlier talk, one of the ways that I use the positive negative polarity is I'll ask myself a question, and I'll just allow it to be this negative charge in my mind. And in the past, I'd ask myself a question and think that I had about 5 seconds to answer it. And of course, when you do that, you do come up with answers, but your conscious mind is asking the question, and just this part of your conscious mind is answering it. So you're getting a really limited little loop. When you ask a question and you allow yourself to just purely rest in it, you potentiate it, and you allow, and you don't force an answer, you don't expect an answer has to come within a really short period of time. You just allow yourself to rest in that feeling, that negative polarity of that unknown, and maybe that curiosity, maybe that question of like, how's it going to happen? What's going to come in? And then when it does finally come in, and it's coming from a much higher level of our awareness or higher level of consciousness, however you want to think about that. But when you do that and allow yourself to rest in the question, longer, deeper answers will come, deeper realizations tend to flow through that way. Okay, so one of the things that we talk about with polarity, that I have talked about this, is attachments and aversions. So, do I have any attachments or aversions towards construction or deconstruction? So do I have a tendency to pack everything? Do I have a tendency to say, it's been 45 minutes, I haven't eaten anything, I haven't had this superfood, I have to, and something that can be really health conscious. I'm not saying that it's like all chips and soda and stuff. It's, you have a constant fear that you're not having enough. You always have to eat, you always have to have this stuff coming in. Do you always have to have space in where your living space filled? Or can you allow some empty space? So do you have any attachments or aversions? And just know that you might have one set of attachments and aversions in terms of your physicality, another in terms of your space, another in terms of relationships, another in terms of work. So it's a rich area to dig into and start to play with. But I'm just saying, if you ask yourself this question, just rest with it and see what insights come. And like I said, the more you can just rest with it and let these things happen, let things percolate into your awareness, the deeper the insights you'll get, rather than just the quick fix. Okay, and then the next question is, how can I bring the two into balance for greater evolution and harmony in my life? So if you do have a little bit more of a bias, or you always lean towards dissolving and detaching and having emptiness and freedom versus, you know, the substance and the attachments and you know, that type of thing, what can you do to bring them in balance? Do you have any sort of rituals? Do you have any sort of tools or resources to help bring them back into balance? Okay, and then the last one, so if you just write these down and just take a moment to feel the question, and notice if any images, any impressions come up, and make note of that. But I would just invite you that if you do have sudden insights, say, that's great. Are there any other attachments or aversions? And sort of keep that door open, because that's when the deeper stuff comes in. Okay, so how can I let go and shift from living, from memory to possibility? And that's the thing too, is that form, if you think of like Solvay Coagula, it can also be like a timeline. What's happened in the past is sort of formed. What is coming in the future is formless. And so often we base what we can do in the future based on what we've done in the past. And the more you can shift and allow yourself to rest in that deep question, that you know, great void of unknown, and feel it as exciting possibility and potential, rather than grasping for the security of the first easy answer you get, allowing yourself to rest with these questions and creating something new in your life. Allow yourself to enjoy the feeling of that negative space, where you can feel that sort of magnetic potential and rest in it, and have curiosity of what can you pull into your life experience. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to talk about is loops, cycles and loops. And again, this is the Ouroborous, like I mentioned before, and some people say, oh, it's only about cycles, it's only about this. But there's many different ways that I've seen to work with this. I'll share a few today, but it's important to always be in the question and always ask, what else can this be used for? What else could this mean in my life? Okay, so one of the things, the most obvious things for me, is that it's a loop. And all loops, in terms of, you can look at ecology of plants and animals on the planet. Like, we breathe out carbon dioxide, plants breathe in carbon dioxide, they breathe out oxygen, we breathe in the oxygen. So that's a loop. As there's you know, increase of temperature in the globe, you know, it's definitely getting out of balance, but at the same time, there's an effort by the Earth to help balance itself, because longer, more more heat related to longer seasons, longer growing seasons than colder climates. And longer growing seasons means that the plants are more actively breathing during those times. So it's extending time when they can utilize the CO2 to the fullest. So it's these self-balancing things. And in systems thinking, there's the whole idea of like, you can have balancing loops and then you can have loops that just keep building on themselves. So the balancing ones is like an AC. Like if it gets a little too hot, it kicks in and it maintains balance. The other loops build on themselves. And as I mentioned before, kind of one of the jokes is that feedback means that you're sending something back to the source and it's changing how things are coming out. So if you give someone feedback on some behavior that they're doing that's disruptive or a problem, if they don't change, technically it's not feedback because you didn't change. They didn't change. If someone's speaking into a microphone, they say, like, they lean forward and there's that sharp, spike in sound. What makes that feedback is what's happening at that moment is enough of their voice is getting in there and it's getting loud, and some of what's coming out of the speaker is getting back into the microphone, and then it just keeps increasing like the snowball. So one of the things that's useful when I look at the Ouroborous, I think about systems, I think about loops, and I think about feedback. Like that's one of the facets that I think is helpful to think about with that. Another thing is belief systems, or I generally like to say BS. It's not to make light of like all belief systems. There's a lot of belief systems that are powerful and they serve us in our life. But there's some belief systems that can be very limiting. And one thing that's a really great quote from Plato is that knowledge is justified true belief. So basically there's the truth and there's what's believed. And as you see from the Venn diagram, not all of what's believed in this example is true. Not all of what's true is believed. But when they meet together in sort of that Besson and Pisces, that's the overlap. And it's really important to evaluate, look at our belief systems to see what's true that we might not believe, and what do we believe that might not be true. And another really thing, we'll just go back to this really quickly. And at the same time, I just want to talk a little bit more about belief systems and the Ouroborous, because the Ouroborous is biting its own tail. And one of the ways we can see that is it's a loop, but it's sort of a closed system. So to see it in sort of a negative way, you could say, well, you're so lost in your own story, you're not open to any new outside influence. Or you're sort of this closed circuit, you're this closed loop. So it's important to look and start to evaluate our beliefs and say, how much of my belief system do I question? Do I have enough openness to take others' perspectives of what they share about what my impact is or my behavior is on them to help shift it? So it's really important to look at it like that, to say, another aspect of the Ouroborous is like what you put out, you get back. So it's like, it's got the body and it's that solid loop. So if you don't allow others to trigger questions or trigger realizations, you're just living in your own story. You're sort of living in your own loop. So that's why it's important to find a way to step back occasionally, step outside of that loop, and sort of have awareness and question your own belief systems. And maybe not throw them away, but at the same time, let go of them enough, get enough distance from them, you can let whatever doesn't serve you, or whatever isn't actually true, to dissolve, and then see certain areas that might be true that you haven't believed. And if you do something like in the Rosicrucian way of thinking, the experiments, if you experiment and you find something is true that you didn't think was true before, then you're shifting. You're taking more of what's true and believing it. And you're letting go of certain things that you believed were true that aren't. So it's useful to think about this diagram and think about solve a coagula, about dissolving old beliefs that are not true or things that don't serve you, and then taking the sort of the elements, gathering them together, and create something new. Okay, so last little bit. So there's another thing about loops and about energy. So I have this thing of the acupuncture, so the meridians of the body. There's the governor channel, the conception vessel, like it's a big loop in the body, and there's a lot of benefits to that. There's this gentleman here, his name is John Archibald Wheeler, and he, just going to share this quick little thing. He, in 1957, published a paper that talked about tensor fields, and that's when you take the two ends of a wire and you put it together and you make it a closed loop. There's a certain quality of energy that happens, and as a result, there's certain people online. There's different rings that people experiment with and offer, and I've had some really good. There's different ones that are out there. I've had really good results and response, and feel a really strong positive shift. The stuff that's his name is Slim Sparling. He has a site called like Light Life Technology, I believe it is. But his stuff, I've had a personal experience that's very powerful with his rings. There's other ones that are out there that's like, I can't verify if they are powerful or not, but I just know his work and his wife's work is pretty amazing. And it's basically about the loop. And I just wanted to share that little piece. You can do your own research, but about tensor fields and about how you could possibly use that. One of the ways of the applications is working with water, and I know that we've done the energy rebalancing here and working as any energy in the water and changing the energetics of it, the feel of it. And a lot of these working with tensor fields can do a similar thing. Okay, so just a few questions of this. So, how do you work with feedback? If someone, are you the closed loop who resists all feedback? Or if someone shares something with you, can you just fully receive it and like allow them to feel heard? Say, thank you so much for sharing that. I understand your point of view, and really sit with it, meditate with it. And if there is some deep truth to it that you're not acknowledging it, find a way to shift. But if someone is sharing something that's really not a deep truth for you, that isn't something that's true to your character or true to your inner being to take on and make that shift, can you allow yourself to just let it go? So it's like solving a coagula. Always being open to influences, but also at the same time really feeling your own core identity, and what to work with that. Okay, and then next, do I ever examine my belief systems? And again, and the next one is how can I apply solve a coagula? So do I ever examine my belief systems? Some people do, spring cleaning and things like that, and they do things with their homes. But a lot of times people might not ever really examine their beliefs. They might get their beliefs from their parents, they might get their beliefs from their community or their profession or whatever it is, and then they stay plugged into those beliefs like Ouroborous, like a closed loop, closed system. And they might use those beliefs, those same beliefs without ever testing them their whole life. So how do you respond to feedback? Do you ever stand back and look at the belief systems? And then how can you let things that don't serve you dissolve? And then how can you find other things maybe you don't have a belief in, or maybe you haven't tested? How can you test them to see, is that true for you? Is that a possibility for you? And if it is, to coagulate, to gather it, to bring it into your being and start to use it then. And then also too, how aware am I of cycles? And I didn't put this in the slide, but I probably should have. But there's a really great H. Spencer Lewis book called Self-Mastery and Fate and the Cycles of Life. And it's all about this, the word fate a lot of times has a really heavy-handed sort of feeling to it. But from reading the book, and it's a really great one to work with because it gets into energetic cycles of working with time and working with the energy, and it's like your own kind of rhythm. How I experience that work is that he's not saying you can't do something on a certain day, or you have to do this thing on this certain day. I like to think of it as weather. It's sort of like, okay, if it's raining out, are you going to have a picnic? Well, maybe you can, but you're not going to have it outside. There's certain, if it's really, really windy, are you going to have a class outside where there's lots of people having pieces of paper? Probably not ideal. Doesn't mean you can't have a class, but you have the freedom to have it, but based on the weather, based on the conditions, you might want to consider having it in a different way. And that book is really great in terms of a reference book to help you sort of see what you could think of as weather patterns. And you could still have the freedom to choose what you're going to choose, but you might want to steer it in a way to make it a little bit easier based on the energetic cycles of what's happening. So it's self-mastery and the cycles of life. Oh wait, what is it? Oh, hold on. Self-mastery and fate with the cycles of life. Sorry about that, just wanted to get the title correct. Okay, so the last piece that I'd like to share with this talk today is alchemy of the heart. So we all are familiar with the Rosicrucian cross, the rose cross, and there's the rose cross over there. So one of the things that really struck me when I first saw this symbol was the whole idea of the cross, of like standing there and having the arms out. That's the cross. And where's the rose? The rose is at the heart. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the power of the heart and alchemy. So take a look here. So we have the law of the triangle. The thing that I love about this is so many layers to it. The cross, there's many different layers to the rose cross, the rose and the cross together. There's the triangle, but also too, if you look, it's also the ankh, like the loop kind of forms an ankh at the same time. Sort of like that's the stem and that's the top of the ankh. So for everyone who's seen this, we cover this a little bit, in some depth in my second talk on the Emerald Tablet about the 7 phases of transformation. Well, another thing that's really interesting, so what does this have to do with that? Well, there's a few things. If you look at this, when I first saw this, I thought that it was like this alchemist, like this sort of like, kind of like guy just like hold up in his study, who's like holding he's like leaning forward like this, because it looks like a face just kind of like doing that. But if you look at it, look at the wings at the top. And you see this right here. That's the top of the caduceus. That represents the pineal. So if that's the top, and the arms are at the side, where's his consciousness? It's in his heart. And what we're going to do is talk just a little bit about the role of the heart in alchemical transformation. And if you look at this, the head is directly in line with the arms. And it's basically, if you take the rose cross, it's exactly where the rose would be, is the consciousness. And also too, there's a triangle. If you can't see that on the video or on the monitor here, you can see this triangle right there. That triangle, there's the triangle. It's the law of the triangle. So there's like any good symbol, there's layers to it. There's lots of different layers that you can pull out. Things will make sense with you at a certain point. They click with you, and then years later you'll see something completely new that's the right thing for you to work with at that time. A whole new layer will be there to work with. So how does the heart relate to alchemy? So this I'll just kind of let that question float for just a few minutes. This is the heart map in like the Santa Cruz area. Is Boulder Creek, I believe it is. But it's in the Santa Cruz area. They've done lots of research about the energetics of the heart. And the heart has 2 different energy fields. There's a smaller field, and then there's a larger field. And one of the big ahas that I had is, I've done Qigong for years, and standing and doing that position is you're holding that inner field. So there's lots of interesting things you can use that for, just in and of itself. But if you look at it, it's an apple. It's one of the essential shapes of creation. And the torus, one thing that's interesting to me is that if you look at it, it feels like the perfect representation of life on Earth, having life on Earth in the foreground and spirit in the background. Because if you look at it this way, a ring would come up out of the North Pole, a small ring would expand and go into the stem, and then expand and contract, and expand and contract. It's like solve et coagula, that cycle. But it's this kind of like a bellows of creation. But if you take that and you rotate it this way, the circle is always perfectly even. If you look at the cross section, it's just perfect. This perfect circle that's just unchanging. And it sort of reminds me of the Charles Ives masterpiece from the early 20th century called the Unanswered Question. And it's these pure triads in the background that represents spirit. I mean, at least to me. And then there's this sort of chaotic, atonal kind of fumbling trumpet that's trying to get in touch with that background of perfection. So for me, the torus is a really unique shape because on one plane, it's this increasing and decreasing and increasing and decreasing, like this sort of hectic aspect of life. But if you rotate your perspective this way, it's this perfect circle, just rotates as a cross section. Another thing that's really interesting about the torus too is that it's a unified shape. There's no inside or outside. And if you look at tangerines, especially apples, a lot of these shapes you can see that they're formed in that flow. And even when we're born, it's like the first cluster of cells. There's, the first cell is fertilized, and then it's like the cell division. What happens is we become a torus. And then basically what happens is there's sort of this kind of development of the heart, essentially. And then basically the body, and then the body pulls the heart into itself. Another thing that's really interesting about the torus is the two kind of essential shapes deep shapes associated with creation is the monad, which is just a circle with the dot in the center of it. So if you take a cross section of the torus this way, and you look down at it, it's the monad. But if you rotate that plane and you slice it this way, it's the infinity, it's the figure eight. It's this endless, it's these two perfect circles that touch, it's this infinity symbol. So there's lots of really interesting things about the torus, and as I mentioned, we are sort of all born that way. We're all Tauruses before we're anything else. Okay, so getting back to the Institute of Heart Map, and leading into the process we're going to do in just a minute, is there's this thing called heart rate variability. And heart rate variability, most people believe, and especially people that might have a background in music, you have a metronome, and you set the metronome to 60 beats per minute, and it's this steady beat, and it never changes. For people that would exercise and put on heart rate monitors, you can see that your heart rate monitor would say that it's this beats per minute. When you do physical exercise, it speeds up. When you stop, it slows down. You might think that your beat is steady like a metronome, but it actually isn't. And what happens is, if you're in a state of love, ease, joy, what happens is your heart rate variability increases. And what that means is, whenever you take an inhale, your heart rate will get a little bit faster. When you take an exhale, it slows down a little bit. So it's this expansion and contraction. It's like this, solve coagula. It's like that, sort of like that Ouroborous. And when you put your attention in your heart, when you put and we're going to do a process in just a minute that uses this, but when you move your attention into your chest, into your heart, and you do this, and you feel all of these elements of your life, and you get into a certain state, what happens is it's the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the system that expands and it takes in new possibilities. The sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight response. So when you allow yourself to relax and expand and take in all of the periphery, then that takes in it's like a larger sphere of awareness. Fight or flight is almost like a pinhole of awareness. And one of the many associations I have with this is this figure is in the center of this creation. Their awareness is in the absolute perfect center of all of this, all of this activity. And what's happening is they're having a peripheral awareness of everything. It's this all-embracing awareness. In that point, they're sort of in that expanded sort of parasympathetic nervous system space where they've got a higher heart rate variability, and they're feeling harmony, they're feeling love, they're feeling expansion. Because people that are working with, doing chemical transformations in labs and things like that, if you have this pinhole thing, you might miss this thing that's going to catch on fire, or this thing that could explode. It's important to have that peripheral awareness, and at the right moment, when you have a fight or flight situation where you authentically really need to take care of something, it does focus, and you take care of what you need to take care of, and then you expand, and you allow the parasympathetic to kind of sense everything. So again, you can see the heartbeat's getting a little bit closer together and a little bit further apart. So what I'd like to do is guide everyone through a process of getting your awareness into your heart, and then what we're going to do is we're going to recall an experience that you've had in your life that you see a certain way, and then seeing how the heart sort of can apply a type of alchemy to it. That the energy field of the heart, the energetics of the heart, the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system over the sympathetic fight or flight response can help unwind and shift that experience. Okay, so whenever you're ready, if you can close your eyes, get to a nice upright seated position and close your eyes. Okay, take a nice deep breath in. Allow it out. Okay, take another nice deep breath in. Allow it out. Allow your body to relax even more. Take another nice deep breath in. And then allow it out. And allow yourself to let go of anything that's not right here and not right now. So take a moment and feel that rest. And also at the same time, any sounds that you may hear, allow yourself to perceive them like passing clouds. And it's actually a really good skill to have. Sometimes, here in LA there might be a helicopter that goes by or a plane that goes by. But if you can experience it the right way, you can see it where it's just a passing cloud. And then when the cloud passes, you have an even greater depth of experience of the blue sky after the cloud has passed. Okay. So just take a moment and allow yourself to feel the peace and tranquility that's beyond sound. Okay, now think of a moment in your life. Think of some time in your life where you had a disagreement with somebody, someone that you cared about, but you had a difference of opinion. You were coming from one place and they were coming from another place. And you had that sort of almost that antagonistic type of push-pull dynamic happening. So take a moment and feel that. As best you can, recall a memory where you had that discord with somebody, or that disagreement. And now, notice your perspective from your head. Notice what's happening. What they're doing, what does that mean to you? What's your experience of their behavior? How are you acting towards them? How do you see yourself acting towards them in your memory? Okay, and now take a moment and feel your heart. And actually put your hand on your heart. And feel how your hand is rising and falling with your breath. Now feel your heart as best you can. With your hands, see if you can even feel your heartbeat. now shift your awareness as best you can and feel the emotional response as shifting your awareness into your heart. And now as best you can, shifting your awareness into your heart, look at this situation from this perspective. And resting in your heart, do you see their actions differently? Do you see your responses and your actions differently? And from this perspective of your heart, being in the place of your heart, can you see the purpose of all of it? Can you see light in it? Can you see the potential in it? Can you see the lesson in it? And just like we mentioned, the unanswered question from Charles Ives, that bed of harmony, the pure triads in the back, and sort of the chaos in the front of the trumpet, sort of that discordant quality in the front. From your heart, can you see through the discord and into the harmony? And that's the question. Can you look through the discord and connect to the harmony? Can you connect to the deep lesson and the harmony within? Where you're still aware of the discord, you're not erasing the history of you and this person, but you're really plugged into the harmony that's through it, that's beyond it. And now from this place in your heart, can you allow yourself to feel a complete awareness of the details of the situation, but feel the higher purpose and feel the higher message of this whole situation? And can you appreciate it? Appreciate it for what it is. And get the lesson from it. And now whenever you're ready, take a nice deep breath in. Allow it out. Another nice deep breath in. And allow it out. Another nice deep breath in. And allow it out. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. All right, and just, I wanted to hear everyone's experience, but at the same time, I just wanted to mention how perfect it is. I don't know what's the sound, the alarm kind of sound that's happening. You're probably aware of that too. But right when we were doing the meditation and that started to happen, if you notice, you can hear that sort of metaphysical music playing. So that metaphysical music was here, and then there was the alarm, there was the beeping. So literally, it was the same thing as the unanswered question. It was the same exact, so if you all want to go and check later tonight, watch a video online, the Charles Ives, the unanswered question, you will literally see exactly what happened here right after I mentioned that. But can I see a show of hands of everyone who felt an authentic shift in how you perceive that event was a loved one. Okay, awesome. Cool, awesome, thank you. And that's the thing too, is the heart. So as I mentioned in the first talk I did on alchemy was, in order for something to be called an alchemy, you have to have something to be transmuted, raised to a higher level of value or vibration. You need to have some type of thing to contain the reaction, and then you need to have an energy source. And in the heart, it's basically what's being transformed is your memory and your relationship, the aspect of your relationship that's affected by that memory with that other person. That you are able to raise that to a higher level by feeling understanding and acceptance and compassion, maybe compassion for the other person, how they responded in the situation, hopefully compassion for yourself. A lot of times we tend to leave ourselves out when we do these things. But that raises it to a higher level. And the container is basically you and that other person. The container is this memory. And the energy source is compassion for your heart. So it all has those three elements together. So would anyone else like to share any experience they had? Okay, cool. All right, well, let's do this. So I'm just going to wrap up this by just saying that it's really important to know that your heart, is such a resource and such a valuable power center and can help really transform things. It's like, remember the rose cross, remember Azoth, the head in the center there, and just remember that also too the heart rate variability. If you're say you're driving in traffic, and I know we don't have traffic here, but sometimes if you did have traffic in LA ever, lightning strikes, you never know. A really easy way to do the heart rate variability thing, of course with your eyes open, would be driving in your car and doing a brief inhale for about 5 seconds, and then an exhale for about 5 seconds. And when you do that, you focus your awareness in your heart. You're watching the road, of course, but you have your awareness in your heart as well as the road, and you have that slow inhale and slow exhale. And what that does is that your body breathing slowly is sending the message that it's safe, that you're safe, that the sympathetic nervous system can take a break. Nothing, there's no fight or flight survival stuff going on right now, and now the parasympathetic can expand and have greater peripheral awareness, which of course would really serve you when you're driving. Have all your mirrors, be able to see all around you, be able to feel all around you. And when you have your parasympathetic nervous system activated, you feel all of it. You're aware of all of it versus the pinhole, fight or flight, I gotta fight or I gotta escape. It's like two little pinholes, the exit or fighting whatever it is, versus having your heart be the center of your awareness. So just remember, it's an inhale 5 seconds, exhale 5 seconds. If you focus be aware of your heart, almost as if you're breathing into your heart and exhaling out of your heart, feel that rise and fall. And that's physiological coherence. And if you add memories of like what you loved or what you appreciated about something, some loving, happy memory, that brings in emotional coherence on top of it. And heart rate variability will actually get more pronounced. Your heart's sort of freer to beat a little faster and then beat a little slower. It's sort of elastic rather than fixed and hard like a metronome. So anyway, so that's it for this week. And thank you all so much for being here. And I'm going to continue the talk next week. It's going to be the third Sunday of the week, third Sunday of the month, and we'll be at 12:30 to 1:30. So awesome. Thank you so much.